Hi everyone, this is Zachary Montasser from the Westheimer String Quartet. Throughout the course of this episode, we will hear excerpts of the Westheimer String Quartet playing Beethoven, Opus 132, and Simon Lack's Third String Quartet. I was listening to a podcast that was reflecting on Shakespeare and his allusions to the plague in his works, and I found an amazing article in the New Yorker that's in the show notes, basically reflecting on how Shakespeare's use of language to describe aggressive feelings, like in Romeo and Juliet, a plague on both their houses, and there are a couple other instances in the 12th Night. It was all very poignantly and very selectively chosen to reinforce a particular element or feeling in his works. And I was just thinking, like, creativity has lasted. It's like a hallmark of the human condition. It's an amazing aspect of what we do as humans. And I just wanted to explore that with you guys. So, like, I guess the question is, why do we resort to music and art during times of strife or during these crisis points?
I think for a lot of people, especially those who are artistically inclined, creativity is fostered by the many different emotions that are experienced in trying times or times of suffering. So, for example, the pieces of music that we're going to discuss might have been born out of those emotions that those artists were experiencing going through that time.
I would say the easiest way to answer it would be personally, since it's the story that we have the most easiest access to, perhaps. But for us as individuals, is music something that we feel like helps us either process difficult situations or suffering, or express it, or release, or any kind of therapeutic quality, I suppose? For us, it would be, as far as I know, mostly performance, right? I know that at least a couple of us, you guys, not myself, dabble in composition a little bit. But to my knowledge, performance is still where you pull most of your inspiration from.
Well, I think at least for me, the crux of the matter is that music has the ability to express a lot that words cannot, and it also is more socially acceptable than certain emotional outbursts might be. So in an instance of frustration or great sadness or something like that, where you might feel tempted to go screaming out into the street, yelling obscenities and causing a ruckus, an alternative might be listening to a piece of music that expresses that and feeling it through the art, or perhaps practicing a piece of music. Again, I'm a violist, so a lot of Hindemith comes to mind. But,
Sure.
those are ways to healthily express emotions that, we've kind of socially set it up as not acceptable to express in the raw emotional form without the vehicle of the art.
I was just going to ask if you might say for a second what it is about the music of Hindemith that works for you, or helps you, or that you...
Yeah,
whatever.
sure.
Yeah.
Well, the immediate examples are the examples that are louder and dissonant are kind of an acceptable way to yell out in frustration, for example. And every human has gone through instances of feeling frustrated. And I personally find that that's a healthy way to, as a child practicing piano, I would sometimes get incredibly frustrated and bang on keys randomly. Hindemith is kind of an organized way of doing that in some ways. And again, please don't come at me. I'm just making statements as to, not trying to be academic here and discuss the construction of Hindemith's music, but the raw emotional feelings of playing it can be a healthy release of, pent-up frustrations that might build in times of human suffering.
I know that for me, I find that there are certain pieces that I know that if I feel like I am kind of stuck or bottled up emotionally, that hopping on the so-called roller coaster of that piece, I know that I have certain feelings associated with certain parts of that music. And so making myself kind of go on that journey is a way of kind of strapping into processing some of those emotions in a way that you can't really get out of without pressing pause. And so in particular, like the movement of the Beethoven that we're featuring in today's episode, I know that for some past things, when I need to just get feelings out, I know that I can put on that recording and then 13 minutes later, I'm going to feel better. Even though I kind of know like I'm in for a rough ride, it can kind of catalyze processing some of those emotions in a way that if you don't know kind of how to get started, that the music can kind of put you on that path. And I find it very, very helpful
I
to be able to do that.
absolutely, I love the way you put that, Darren. What was the term you used? Like catalyzing or
Yeah.
Wow, that's absolutely, I think that's a excellent concept to explore just a little bit, because I think a lot of the music that we will feature on today's podcast, they reflect a truth and an emotion of real intense, really, really, really intense, like I guess an emotion on an emotional spectrum. So in Beethoven's case, we'll get to the specifics later, but the there's a universal truth and appeal to masterworks, to really excellent pieces of music, and the potential for these works to reach out and to kind of create this, I don't know, this universal understanding of, okay, things are going to be okay, or like a universal recognition. Like in Alexa's case, Alexa, you were talking about how it's a very okay way to express if you are really sad or you're about to, I don't know, like punch a door or something. Well, maybe that's just me.
Teenage Sean commiserates.
But what I find is so interesting is that we can feel the feelings through music and we can have our own feelings validated. And I think that is a really, really strong therapeutic element of music. And so we don't necessarily have to, we can feel heard without
Would
really
you say that
saying
it almost
anything.
feels like by listening to the particular pieces or particular performances, you feel validated because you almost feel like they understand or they have, expressed honestly and truthfully something that verbally is hard to know that someone is understanding what you're trying to communicate.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's really interesting. The idea that words communicate something very clearly and directly, but it also means that somebody else might experience something very similar but want to communicate that verbally, but they would do it differently, right? And music kind of has this ineffable quality where it takes away that aspect of it and it really just connects to the thing that somebody is trying to communicate. And that is really what I think helps us to connect to other people. And when you're listening to old composers, connect back across time and see how so many of the things that we experience as humans feel new and important right now. But there's a commonality, as far back as you can find music that's been recorded in any way, that people have been feeling very similar things and probably will feel very similar things for a long time to come.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And I'll just, finish that thought maybe and say, I think that's part of what makes certain pieces of music so powerful is that it's a representation of this composer saying, humans have been here before.
Absolutely.
I invite you to experience it with us again, from the past, from the future, from the present. Humans have been here before.
I love that. I'm going to give you a little bit of background on an excerpt that we're going to hear of the Third String Quartet by Polish composer Szymon Laks. Laks was a Warsaw-born Jewish musician and composer and was deported to Auschwitz in 1942. He was arrested in France and then transported to Auschwitz. When he arrived, there was an orchestra at the concentration camp, and Laks initially was a member of the group, but eventually became its music director. Composed in 1945, this particular quartet, on popular Polish themes, carries a lot of emotional damage, but is also very grateful and a very positive piece, according to Camden Shaw, cellist of the Dover Quartet. I found a wonderful account of a reflection on Laks' works being brought to life by various groups, the Dover Quartet being one of them, and Shaw's words resonated with me. He says that the quartet's Polish folk melodies suggest a kind of nostalgic release after World War II and years of self-imposed exile in Paris. He had been holding it in for so long and was thirsty for memories of his home music that he could not hear under such horrible circumstances. Finally, this comes pouring out as a celebration of making it back home. It really is a special and incredible find, and I hope you guys enjoy.
Alexa, just to go back to what you were saying a minute ago, do you think that that is a way of, or what element do you think that that is also of like providing comfort in that, like it means like if you're experiencing some very dark emotion or something that like people have been here before and they've gone through it before, and so you also are probably not mired in this for the rest of your life, you know, that there is something past this, there is a double bar and you will get to the next
There
piece,
is
so to speak.
resolution.
Yeah, I think it's like Zach was saying, it's a way of validating the feelings that one might be having in the present, to know, oh, people have been here before and this is what it sounds like and how it was experienced, and you can experience it again here. And that's a form of validation that is, I believe, healthy and helpful.
So on that note, can we talk about pieces that provide that kind of validation for us?
Other than Hindemith, viola works.
Exactly.
No, those are the only ones.
My iPod is just a loop of Hindemith viola sonatas.
Music to my ears.
Is there anything other than Schwan and Dreyer?
No, I can say that in the first pieces that really did this, or the first composer, I should say, that really accomplished what Alexa was saying at the top of our conversation about, you know, you feel like screaming and punching a hole in the wall. Shostakovich for me in high school was just like, if I need to let something out, I would just turn on his piano trio and the string quartets, you know, one of the symphonies.
Is there any better marriage than teenage angst and Shostakovich?
For me, I don't think there was. And I remember even as a teenager reading like musicologists kind of poo-poo Shostakovich, and I was just like, no, man, he speaks to me.
How has that changed or kind of been tempered as you have gotten older and your perspective on the world has changed, and your, even to some degree, like your ability to manage your own emotions?
Yeah.
How do you feel like that changes the way that the music speaks to you?
That's such a good question. Yeah, I mean, because like my emotions feel very different now than I did when I was 14, 15, right? And the way that
Thank goodness for that.
Yes, thank goodness
Yeah,
for
right.
that.
Amen.
And and the types of emotions so if they feel different, then the kind of music that would speak to me would likely change too. But there's always going to be, you know, the teenage Sean is still in here somewhere.
That's what I was about to ask. Yeah,
the teenage Sean is still in here.
Tap back into that.
Yeah, I can. It's not, you know, it's not like I would listen to the same pieces every day now, like I would at that point. And there is some degree, unfortunately, of, you know, you get tired of the stuff that gets played all the time.
Right.
And as us jaded musicians, you still have to find ways to enjoy the old classics. Not really off topic. Yesterday, I just performed the Brandenburg, Concerto No. 3, which I've played a bunch of times. And first time I would think I was in 8th grade. So it would be very easy but I was still able to find the joy in it. I was still able to find, you know, what was exciting about it, or find new things.
Can confirm, saw the live feed. Sean, you were dancing, man. It was super, it was very enlivening.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Well, and I think, sorry, go ahead.
No. I was going to say specifically to Shostakovich and what I listen to now. Yes, I still love Shostakovich, and I can still, especially a really good live performance of a favorite by Shostakovich can still get me really excited. But I also have a much deeper appreciation for like Mozart and Schubert and Haydn that were all super boring when I was 14, 15. It's like a subtlety versus, you know, in the words of Larry Radcliffe while we were at Rice, there's no such thing as an upbeat in Shostakovich. It's always body slam.
Oh, jeez.
So, yeah, I it's a good question, though.
Well, and I think that you hit on a thing right there very small that I want to highlight, which is that we're not only talking about, like, we're talking about, you know, music in times of crisis, but that doesn't mean that the music has to be, you know, emotionally fraught or sad or anything like that. This is also a time where you can find joy and uplifting things and positive emotions in music as a way of kind of pushing back against the darkness, so to speak. You know, that music has so many different emotions in it that what you might need from day to day, maybe today you need Shostakovich, maybe tomorrow you need Brandenburg, but they both, they both kick you down the path.
They both
so interesting
of feeling a little bit more human after listening to it or experiencing it than you did.
Sure.
beforehand.
I know that for me, one of the pieces that really does this is Prokofiev's second piano concerto, especially the first movement, because of it has this way of building through the cadenza, and then there's this big moment of release where the brass comes back in with the theme, and it feels so powerful, and it feels like a storm kind of sweeping through in a matter of 30 seconds or something like that, that then you just kind of feel drained and empty in a way afterwards. And then almost like your job as a human is to like figure out how to kind of refill yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And so as a way of just kind of getting emotions out on the floor, that's a piece that really, like, I know that if I need to get something out, look out Prokofiev, here I come.
This is somewhat tangential, but I'm curious if your relationship to favorite pieces ever changes after having played it.
Okay, so in my early 20s, I had a very similar reaction to Beethoven's Grosse Fugue as you did for Prokofiev. Like the amount of the emotional content, how all of it just worked as it was as an exercise, as a piece of expression. It resonated with me more than anything. I mean, I would sit and listen to it for hours trying to figure out like how I would track the lines if I were in the group playing it. And then in my mid-20s, I had the amazing opportunity to play it with a conductorless orchestra. And the conductorless orchestra was with some amazing, amazing people. It was all super democratic, and everybody was free to share how they felt certain melodic lines should go. And it was an amazing, amazing experience. But I will say, as a performer, whenever I'm learning a new piece, I fantasize about a certain type of interpretation that I would bring. But when you're in an ensemble, like a conductorless ensemble, like you get to a point where you have to realize that my own personal interpretation of the piece there has to be some kind of compromises, and there has to be a little bit more depth to it. And that depth is created by the influences of the other players in the group. Whereas initially, I would listen to the Cleveland Quartet recording. I wouldn't stop. Like I listened to it for hours and I'd lose track of time. And then after I played it with the 42nd Parallel, the conductorless orchestra, it felt different, but it still had an incredible significance. And then when we programmed it, it had a complete different dimension, because there was like when we play it as a quartet as opposed to a chamber group, the amount of intimacy between the players is just, oh my gosh, it's so raw. And so I just tap into each and every person's articulations and their line and their intonation in such a real intense way. I am dying to play that piece again and again because of it's a huge, like, beautiful architectural, like, sonata form, fugato kind of like, this amazing, I guess you'd call it like a hybrid, or it's just an amazing piece of music. And I don't know if I could ever really get my brain around not only like the compositional acrobatics, but the emotional content. It's just an amazing piece. And doing it with us in certain phases of our string quartet lives. Like we did it, I think, towards the beginning, maybe like the second or third year. And when we keep making recordings and we keep, playing concerts, we're just going to grow as a group, and the piece will only have more significance to me. I don't know. I'm really excited for the journey that I've had with that particular piece as it pertains to my personality, my personal journey, and how it will grow as I get older with you guys.
Incidentally, we played this before Alexa joined us. Alexa, have you played the piece before?
No, I have not.
Oh, I cannot wait.
Well, we would love to play with you.
Cannot wait.
Yeah, I would love to play it. I do have some thoughts on this idea as a whole, though, and I have programmed one of the pieces that I had strong feelings about for us, the Schubert Quintet. And in my experience, it was interesting because I found that I feel that I cannot communicate the things that are so powerful to me when I listen to it, when I play. I feel like I'm not, or was not, in that space yet, or perhaps, I'm not able to communicate with myself, if that makes sense, or communicate the way that I like to hear it.
Interesting.
Do you mean that you weren't able to feel it the way that you wanted to while you were playing it? Or that you don't think that you were able to convey that idea across?
Both, I think.
That's maybe a little bit...
Yeah.
Yeah, what I'm hearing is that you're not able to be receptive to your own music making. That's kind of what I'm hearing. But maybe that's not exactly what you're saying.
A little bit of that. Yeah, I think so. I haven't played many pieces that I have felt as strongly about as that one. And so approaching it was a little bit interesting. I mean, I guess I feel like the last time Before that might have been the Sibelius Violin Concerto, and that was goodness knows how many years ago.
You were a violinist.
Oh,
Was this your first time playing the Schubert?
Yes, it was.
Alexa, do you think that any of that comes down to, as a listener, the way that you take in kind of the totality of the piece, whereas as a performer, you are contributing, in the case of the Schubert Quintet, you're contributing to 1/5 of it, so to speak, and that you
Yeah,
can't, like, you're just
absolutely.
restricted from being able to say things on the behalf of the rest of the group.
Right, and you're kind of forced to be reactive and receptive to the responses of the musicians with whom you are playing, which is a wonderful thing. But while you are doing that with most of your being, you're not really able to be receptive to
Sure.
the actual sounds that are being produced. In fact, I still, you could ask me today and I would say I have no idea what that sounded like. I could go listen to our recording, but I'm just saying, as far as being in the performance, I did not experience it the same way, even close to just what listening to it does for me.
When you perform solo music, do you feel like you have a similar change of perspective, or do you feel like you are able to communicate what you want to when it's not a collaborative effort?
I would say that it is similar in a lot of ways, and often when I listen back to a solo performance of myself, I find it better than I thought in the moment. Not from just a technical standpoint, but certainly that too.
Mhm.
But I find that perhaps I was able to get more listening to it while I'm not playing, even though it's the same performance as, I played it. And that makes me hopeful that perhaps people listening to it got something more from it too than I felt that I was able to express while I was creating it. So maybe that's part of the experience of being a musician, at least for some of us, is, feeling as if we're falling a little short of our communication in the actual performance in real time. And then luckily we have the luxury of being able to go back and listen to recordings and things and maybe discovering that there is something here. I was able to say some of what was intended, and perhaps my audience got some of that, and I'm able to see that now, whereas I wasn't while I was producing it.
Well, I think that you hit it exactly right, that there's some element of falling short when you are, you have this emotion that you're trying to communicate and you feel it so clearly and so strongly, but there is always the barrier of, bringing that into the physical world.
Yeah, the imaginary potential is limitless, whereas the real product has limits. I think that's where it comes from.
Exactly.
Zach, I was wondering if you wanted to mention your perspective as a composer here as well, or if you wanted to save that for later. Or
Oh my goodness. I think that'd be very relevant. I compose every now and again. As I've gotten older, I've realized that the violin cannot be my main mode of emotional expression because of the elements we've talked about, the imaginary potential versus the limited nature of our performance practice. And I've written a couple pieces for solo violin, and those moments in my life, there have been a couple of very personal significance. The first one being when my grandfather passed away, and he was instrumental in my music career. The first reason being he bought me my first instrument. But he was 110% supportive of every musical decision I made. When he passed away, I felt a loss that I haven't felt ever. And so the only way for me to truly express that and to do it in a way that was true to my feelings was to compose and to just play. And so I created maybe a 2 to 3 minute piece. It's not a symphony by any means, and I'm certainly
I've heard it.
It is
It's lovely.
Thank you. It's an expression. It's a song. It's a piece, and but it very, very accurately captures my my angst after he passed, and the love that I have for him, and I think the melody was so pure, and it very much reflects who he was, and that coupling of my representation of him and of my feelings was very true to me. And every time I've performed it, I think it really resonates with the audience because there is that real connection. To be clear, I have zero compositional training. So am I a composer? No. But this is how I have chosen to express myself during a time of personal crisis and perception of
Well,
the
you
world.
are a composer. Maybe it's composer with a little c and not composer with a capital C.
Yes.
But as one who composes music, you are a
Love that.
composer, and I don't think that you should sell yourself short on that.
Thank you, Darren.
I also had a very similar experience where my grandfather financed my first cello, and my family is from Australia on that side of the family. And so when I was finishing my undergraduate degree, as an homage to him and as a thank you, I wrote a set of tunes that were kind of riffs or paraphrases on some, I guess you could call them Australian folk songs. But when he passed away, we had the opportunity to perform them in a slightly rearranged setting at his memorial service. And that was very meaningful for me, and I was glad that you guys were able to participate in that. But no, my history as a composer has been more that I have an idea in my head and I can't live my life until it's out of my head. And so I put it on paper and then move on with my life. So
That's pretty awesome. That's so funny because I'll get those moments and then it'll just fall out of my ears. And it's like the emotional content for me that solidifies it. I'm a little bit jealous is all I'm saying.
Well, I didn't compose anything when my grandfather passed away technically last year, December of 2019. But it was similar to you guys. It sounds like he didn't buy my first instrument, but he was at every single recital growing up. He was definitely my biggest fan. And I didn't compose anything for it. I was going to say, though, that I did play Amazing Grace at his memorial service, and I did my own arrangement. And speaking of pieces that we've been playing a long time, I think I played that for the first time at a funeral when I was 7 or 8, something like that. And he's been telling my mom and my grandma since I was about that age that he wanted me to play it at his funeral when he passed. And it was definitely among the more powerful experiences of my life. And I think probably among the more honest performances and vulnerable I've ever been on stage. It was, for a piece that I've been playing 25 years, I practiced that every day for I think 2 weeks before the funeral service to make sure that I wouldn't that I could still play it even if I was having a train wreck. But it felt like the most honest way for me to say goodbye and the best way for me to communicate that non-verbally, I think.
Well, that's incredibly special. And also, I imagine everybody there probably felt the gravity of that, perhaps even more than you did. I don't want to make any assumptions, but just one of those things, kind of like we were talking about before, how everybody is free to experience things in a unique, individual way based on a performance where the individual performing is also experiencing it in a unique and individual way. So it's really, really special to hear about that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know that I had plenty of tears by the time I finished playing, and most of the people that in the room when I finished, I looked out and there were a lot of tears. So that might be transition time.
Yeah. Let's listen to an excerpt of the third movement of Beethoven's Opus 132. Beethoven wrote this piece after recovering from a serious illness, which he had feared was fatal because he had been afflicted with an intestinal disorder for about 6 or 7 months. He thus headed the movement with these words: "Holy song of thanksgiving of a convalescent to the deity," in the Lydian mode. In this excerpt, we experience a transition of emotions from a place of sincere introspection that verges on the melancholic to a seemingly manic episode of frivolity and passion, but it ultimately resolves into another period of reflection. I imagine Beethoven's emotional state was probably tormented with intestinal agony, trapped in his sickbed, all the while knowing that he had so much more music to give to the world. The last point I would like to address is how COVID and the trying times we're experiencing now is influencing us as music makers. And I want to start first on the personal level, and then we can talk about what we're experiencing as a group. Personally, I'm trying to make sure that I am in love with music or expressing myself through music as much as I can. And so I'm going back to pieces that I love because I feel that there's no better way for me to appreciate music I don't know than to ground myself in the pieces I love. So I've just been exploring. The Brahms Violin Concerto is one, the Bartók Hungarian Dances. There's a piece by a composer in town named Mark Buller that is this incredible, it's like this celestial, it's like this ambiance piece that is inspired by one of Bach's chorales. Just, basically getting my teeth into the things that really excite me so I can kind of take that energy and infuse it into things that I need to work on later.
One of the things I think I've struggled with in this time is that so much of my pursuits as a musician in what I'm calling the before times was professionally driven, right? It was, I have this concert coming up, or I have to learn this for my students, or something to that. And in a lot of ways, people are finding ways now to put on concerts, but for a lot of people, the professional artistic life doesn't really exist right now. And how do you feel like that is changing your efforts? Do you feel like it's making you more inclined to do things musically or less inclined, or how is it different? I'm curious.
For me, I definitely am holding on tighter, and that could change over time, but I just need it. Like, I need to make sure that I'm able to technically execute and to play with emotion. That's what's kind of grounding me through all this.
Speaking for myself, in relation to your question, Darren,
Yeah.
I'm finding that it has impacted my musical creative life immensely, and that it's come to a complete standstill, if I'm completely honest. And basically, I haven't been doing anything at all. I am only just starting to pick myself up and dust off and have even the urge to be creative musically. The COVID pandemic also brought around the loss of my professional job. I was actually, part of the Houston Symphony as one of their community embedded musicians. And so in a way, now they're putting on limited musician performances. That used to be my musical identity in a way. That used to be my where I used to use music and experience music the most. And it was, that part of my life was brought to an end. And so in the period of uncertainty and change, I found myself doing nothing at all. And that was kind of my way of coping, or giving it time to breathe, and with the idea that eventually I would come back in a way that I was not pressuring myself to do before it felt natural. And I think for some people that is what happens. Everything kind of stops, and then some recovery time was necessary to come back and find some semblance of normal. And I feel like that's going to be a collective kind of feeling, as far as we're not at normal yet. And it'll be really exciting as we get closer and closer to the little steps that we can take to bring some creativity back into our musical lives.
I think that I'm closer to Alexa than I am to Zach on this one. Most of my time doing music was teaching private students, and for what I can imagine is 100 different reasons, I lost a lot of them very quickly when the pandemic hit. And so I found myself with a lot of time to think about that and try to figure out kind of how to fill that time. And I tend to be kind of a slow coper. And so it took me some time to deal with that and not really be bitter, because I'm sure that, it was a decision that everybody had to weigh. And I can imagine that for a lot of people, a cello lesson is not the most important thing when the world is metaphorically and now literally on fire. And so it's just been, recently I'm trying to branch out more and explore more of my personal interests that are tangential to music, so that I still have music as something that I do. And it's been a really nice time to be able to listen to music and explore things and get excited about new discoveries. Some of the projects that we're working on as a quartet is trying to be better champions for composers of color. And so exploring catalogs of those composers has been really, really wonderful to try and figure out what kinds of things we might want to play in the future, and finding, new sounds and new pieces that I may not have had a chance to really dive into, because sometimes when you hear about a composer, you have time to check out, like, oh, here's their greatest hit, listen to it. And if you don't like it, then, well, maybe that's representative of everything that composer wrote, and now you just don't like that composer. But now having a chance to explore a whole swath of their music and understand their voice and really figure out what it is they're trying to share has been really refreshing. And it's one of the things that I am actually kind of finding a little bit of life in, is just getting excited about new music and the possibility of sharing that again in the future.
I have had intermittent periods since quarantine began, which I guess has now been 6 months ago, just about,
Too long.
of either lack of motivation or lack of time or lack of whatever to practice. So I definitely wouldn't say that I've been incredibly consistent. I have had periods, and I would say that this is in the same category or the same boat, where, like Alexa said, you just need time away to reorient yourself and rediscover why you're doing what you're doing, and to make sure that you are doing it for the quote unquote the right reasons, whatever that means for you, which I think is what the pandemic and quarantine has done for me in essence, which is just an opportunity to investigate motivations and intentions. Just big questions as like, what about music gives me joy? And what aspects of it can continue to when I'm making music by myself versus when I'm with other people? And so it's an opportunity to ask, am I being motivated to make music because I like playing in front of other people on stage? Because I like to play music with other people in the same room? Or because there's something intrinsically pleasing or joyful about the playing of the instrument or teaching the instrument? And I would say that it's been a really valuable opportunity to make sure, I guess, for myself, that the motivations are, again, put air quotes around, pure or wholesome, or like just making sure that I'm aligning myself with a path that will be the most likely to make myself and other people happy. And if my motivations are allowing that to happen or are conducive to that happening, can there be something intrinsically valuable or joyful in just having the instrument in my arms and making sounds, right? Like just reconnecting with the original draw, or maybe that wasn't the original draw. The original draw is probably closer to, I want to impress whoever, or, I'm getting attention when I do this and therefore it's fun. And so maybe it's a newer discovery for me than it would have been for some people. But
I think sorry to just jump in, but
no, yeah.
I think for people who are musicians, and we're all professionals at this point, have been doing it for years, there had to have been probably equal parts love for the sounds and the energy and everything, and the societal reinforcement. I think there's a tandem there. Right.
Well, it's no fun to go on stage and play for like one person who doesn't clap at the end, right?
Right. Exactly.
Well, as a group, we have tried to stay busy and tried to, we're trying to figure out how to be a quartet when we can't really be a quartet. And it's challenging because the whole draw of chamber music is being able to sit in a room and have a musical conversation with your ensemble mates. And it's really one of the things that's kind of missing for me in this process, even though we can get to the point where we can produce something that is like a representation of music made together in the same room. It definitely doesn't satisfy the same thing in my heart that actually playing with you guys does. And I really miss that. And I know that we're making some plans soon to be able to get back together. And I just cannot wait because as nice as it is to do some things, like comparatively, this sucks.
Yeah.
How much of a gap was there for you guys, if any, between starting to learn your instrument and making music with other people? Or was it one and the same?
I think I was terrible at it, but I think with the Suzuki, I was a super hard Suzuki kid, like thrown into it deep. So like I always had like group recitals, and so we'd always do like a bunch of. But in terms of thinking about harmony, like in the way that we think of, no way. Not until high school, if not like really thinking about it in college.
Well, my father was my teacher, and one of my first concerts was playing a piece called The Frog that was basically me as a 4-year-old playing open G, and my father playing a very intricate melody on top of that. So,
Oh, I'm so jealous.
That's beautiful.
in some ways it was one and the same for me, just in the family scale
Yeah.
at least.
Yeah, same for me. I was a Suzuki kid as well, and we had group classes and stuff like that from the very beginning. I wasn't doing it regularly because I was homeschooled when I started, so I didn't do public school orchestra until like 7th grade, I think. There was also a big jump in how seriously I was taking it when I started playing with other people too. So for me, I think up until, quarantine, it's always been a huge part of my motivation for playing.
On that note, I can't imagine what it would be like to be younger and experiencing the effects of the quarantine. If I was just starting out to discover the joys of chamber music. You were saying you were in public school orchestra in, what did you say, 7th grade or something like that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, imagine if that was ripped away at that age and you never really got to develop the initial interests, maybe. I can't imagine how different that must be for people, both younger and older than me.
Yeah, it's been interesting to see. Been interesting to see my students. Some of them have kind of almost thrived on the freedom and the time to practice on their own and not perhaps compare themselves to other people in the room. But it's been debilitating for more than a couple of them in terms of wanting to pick up their instrument on a daily basis, no question.
And I think the social element is hard to replicate if you're not in school, because you create the friends.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, right. How many of our social circles are built primarily on the people that we know through our musical network?
I mean, at this point as an adult, yeah, it's so hard to break out and to meet people who are in different fields. Faux show. But I'm hopeful. Zach is hopeful.
I certainly think for people who are already huge fans of music, this experience of limitation will bring a greater appreciation when live performances are unleashed again.
Right?
So
like,
true.
I cannot wait to go to concerts.
Yeah.
Gosh, me too.
I moved down into the Heights a couple of years ago with the intention of going to more concerts because I was closer to all of the venues. And it's kind of one of my regrets sitting through COVID is that I didn't really do that. And I'm spending a lot of time down here now, totally unable to do that. And it is definitely kind of reigniting that fire to give up, quote unquote, give up the free time that I have to go to concerts, because I think that as browbeaten as we can get by life, it can be hard to want to go and do another thing on the weekend when it's your time to kind of sit and recover. But I think I really underestimated how much restoration I got emotionally from being able to attend performances and see my friends play music and see people I don't know play music and be exposed to new pieces.
How would you describe your relationship between recordings versus live performances pre-pandemic versus now?
Recordings was always kind of like the easy answer. It was like, well, I can put on whatever piece, while I'm doing dishes and tell myself that I'm getting the same thing out of it. But there's something so different about a live performance. It's very visceral, and you get to have an interaction and a connection with the performers. And there's always the kind of the thrill of sitting through very exciting music and being drawn into a very emotional performance in a way that you maybe didn't expect if it's a piece that you don't know or something like that I think can be really, really lost when you just listen to recordings in a space that is not dedicated or kind of sanctified for that purpose.
Sure.
Yeah, I
right?
think
like that there's something holy about a performance that there isn't in a recording. And I am not a particularly religious person, but if I had to pick a religion, it's music, and I miss going to church.
Yeah, well, a concert is a gathering of people who have committed to being there, who've showed up. You don't communicate with them beforehand. You know, you don't know everybody else in the audience of a concert, but they're there with you to see the same thing and do the same thing. And there's something very powerful in knowing, these people also love this or also want to experience this with me, even though they don't know me and did not intend to experience it with me. And while you can go to a recording and you just you know that other people have listened to it and probably are listening to it right now, it's not the same as being in a room to share that at the same time. You know, part of the excitement that you were talking about of a concert, I think, is now the thing we've taken so much for granted, and we all realize we have, of just going outside and getting dressed and prepared for an event that happens at a certain time.
Absolutely.
Where you will see other people that also committed to going to this event, you know, putting on real pants to go and be a certain place at a certain time. And my hope is that we won't take that for granted as much. And, you know, Darren, to speak to your point, you might decide to go out to the concerts more often now, knowing that that could be taken away for various reasons. And, you know, likewise for myself.
Having said all of that, I don't miss listening to people unwrap candies during concerts. So when we start having concerts again, please do that at home.
You know, if you're coming to my concert, I don't care. Just do whatever you want. Just be there. Yeah, and I'll be happy to see you. I'll play Hindabit so it's louder than the candies.
There you go. There you go. That's a great idea.
I just need applause. I need the applause.
And if you come to a Quartet concert where you both are at, have one that's unwrapped and one that you still have to unwrap.
All right. Well, I think I'm going to wrap things up.
Unwrap the candies. Let's wrap it.
He unwrapped it. Now he's wrapping it back up just to piss Darren off.
We're gonna wrap this candy. Exactly right. So in conclusion, I'll leave you guys with this, and maybe it resonates with you guys, but I read on the side of the Arts Museum in San Antonio, art is the stored honey of the human soul. What I think really gets me why I'm so enthusiastic about this quote is because, yes, art is the stored honey, but we're also able to share it as musicians. Composers are able to create an art that is living through each and every performance. And we've reflected on how, you know, during crisis, composers compose and musicians will still make music. Ultimately, we'd like to invite you guys, everybody listening out there, to consider music through this lens and to pursue your own ways of being creative during these trying times. Thank you so much for listening. We've really enjoyed having you guys here with us, and we look forward to podcasts to come.
Thank you so much, Zach, for leading us through this very enjoyable conversation.
Yeah, this has been great.
I had a great time.
It's always fun to hear people talk when you're like, well, I think I already know everything that you think about everything, and be proven wrong.
Yeah.
I wasn't planning on saying... I talked about a lot of stuff.
I